Chapter 13. George was staring at Nancy as if she'd lost her mind. "Will you please speak English?" she said. "Nothing you just said makes sense." "Okay, let's say Joanna Burton replaced the diamonds with cubic zirconia herself," Nancy began. Then she pretended that someone else made the switch so she could collect on her insurance for the missing diamonds. Understanding lit up George's brown eyes. "That would be an ideal way for her to raise money," she agreed. "Then she'd have the insurance money and the diamonds in case she needed to sell them to raise more money." Nancy frowned as another thought occurred to her. Wait a minute. If Joanna Burton did steal her own diamonds, then who killed her and why? Maybe she caught someone trying to take the diamonds from her, and that person got scared and killed her, George suggested, shrugging. "That makes sense," Nancy agreed. "Or maybe the guilty person is someone who might profit from her death. I don't see what reason Cy Baxter would have, or his assistant. Joanna Burton's agent, Stephanie, would only lose money if she murdered the actress." Nancy paused, snapping her fingers. "The only person who's come out ahead in this scheme is Morgan Fowler. He has a role in a movie and a new agent." Bess pulled the car up to the curb and honked. After climbing in, Nancy and George quickly filled Bess in on what they had been discussing. "What?" Bess exclaimed, her mouth hanging open. "Do you really think she'd steal her own diamonds and let someone else take the blame?" "Maybe if she wanted to make a film come back badly enough," Nancy answered. "I wish I could go out to Joanna Burton's house and look around, but I'm sure the police have it sealed off. Maybe I could find something out there to help me figure this out." "Like the diamonds?" Bess asked. Nancy nodded. "Or some clue as to who Miss Burton's killer was." Within minutes, the girls had arrived at the Province Inn. As soon as they got to Nancy and George's room, Bess went for Ted's videocassette recorder, and George unpacked their dinner. "Don't think about doing anything but resting tonight," Bess told Nancy. "You're getting into bed and staying there." Nancy didn't protest. Her ankle was throbbing painfully, and she didn't think she could have made it to Joanna Burton's house, even if there was a way for her to get in. When Bess brought her 2 of her pills for pain, Nancy took them gratefully. "Let's eat and watch the movie at the same time," Bess suggested, slipping the videocassette into the VCR. When Bess turned off the lights, Nancy set her half-eaten roast beef sandwich aside and tried to get comfortable. She wasn't sure she'd seen this movie before. It opened with Trish attending a formal dinner. There were lots of people Nancy knew she should be able to name, but couldn't. About halfway through the dinner, one of the guests discovered that her diamond ring was missing. Nancy blinked, trying to stay awake. "Boy, this medicine is really making me sleepy," she murmured. Bess said, vaguely, her attention focused on the screen. Nancy's lids were growing heavier and heavier. She decided to rest her eyes for just a minute. In the back of her mind, Nancy heard a squeaking noise she couldn't quite identify. What?" She cracked open an eye, trying to figure out what was making the noise, then came fully awake when she saw daylight streaming in the window. "Wow, it's morning," she said, sitting up. She was still wearing her clothes, but someone had covered her with a blanket. The noise she'd heard was George turning off the shower. A moment later, George came out of the bathroom, wearing a bathrobe and drying her short, dark hair with a towel. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she greeted Nancy cheerfully. "What time is it?" Nancy asked. "Almost 9 o'clock. You slept for hours," George told her. "I feel so lazy," Nancy stretched. "Once I took that medicine, I just couldn't stay awake." "How's your ankle this morning?" George asked. Nancy gingerly moved her left foot, rotating it in a circle. It felt stiff, but not nearly so painful as it had the night before. Swinging her legs over the side of the bed, she gingerly put her weight on her left leg. "It still hurts, But not much, she announced. The telephone rang just then, and Nancy reached out to answer it. "Hi, Mr. Menendez," she said. "I'm fine, really." Nancy laughed. "I don't think I'm ready for golf," she said, and she noticed George's face light up. "But George might want to go. Here, I'll put her on." George shook her head and backed away. "I'm not going to leave you here alone," she whispered. Nancy covered the mouthpiece with her hand. "That's silly. You love golf, and this is your chance to play." She held the phone out again, and this time George took it. "You're sure? What will you do?" she asked Nancy. Nancy nodded. "Right now I'm going to take a long, hot shower. I'll be fine," she assured George. While George spoke to Mr. Menendez, Nancy grabbed some fresh clothes and stepped into the small, steamy bathroom. "Bess is here with breakfast," George yelled, just as Nancy finished dressing and rewrapping her ankle with the ace bandage. "How'd the movie turn out last night?" she asked as she joined Bess and George at the small table set up in the kitchenette. "Trish Tottenham solved the mystery and caught the bad guys," Bess said with a grin. "As usual." George finished up her apple muffin, then stood up. "Sorry to eat and run, but I've got to meet Mr. Menendez in the lobby in about 2 minutes," she said. "Leave a note if you guys go anywhere, okay?" With a quick wave, she grabbed her golf clubs and left. "So, what should we do today?" Nancy asked, smiling at Bess. "I'm glad you've got the day off." Getting up from the table, Bess went over to Nancy's bed and flopped down on it. "I think I need a break from that place." "The restaurant?" Nancy asked. "I thought you loved it there." "I do. I did." She sighed, tugging at the hem of the open weave sweater she wore over her red tank top and bicycle shorts. "It's not the work that's getting to me, and I really like Ted, too. It's just that, well, he gets pretty jealous when you guys are around. It's kind of hard on me." Nancy wasn't sure of what to say. "He does seem kind of possessive about you," she finally ventured. "He doesn't mean anything by it," Bess hurried to add, but she broke off as the phone rang. Reaching over, Bess picked up the receiver and said, "Hello?" "Hi, Ted." Nancy sipped on a glass of orange juice and poured milk over her cereal. "You promised me you'd put those tarts away so they wouldn't spoil," Bess said into the receiver angrily. Nancy saw Bess's face turn red. "Nancy and George have been here 2 days, and we haven't done any of the things I'd planned. Can't you order something from one of the bakeries?" "Oh, okay, I guess I could do that," Bess said reluctantly. Then she slammed the receiver down. "I can't believe it," she told Nancy. "I asked Ted to do one simple thing, put the pastries in the refrigerator when he closed up last night. Well, he forgot, and they spoiled, so I have to go make something to serve today." Nancy felt awful for her friend. Bess was obviously upset that their day together was being interrupted. "Did he say why he couldn't get desserts from someplace else?" Nancy asked. "He said some people are coming just to try my desserts," she said. Nancy frowned. She wouldn't be surprised if Ted had lied. Then, smiling at Bess, she managed to say, "Go on and make the desserts. You can probably be done before George gets back. Then we can all do something together this afternoon. It will do me good to rest my ankle a little longer." Bess came over and gave Nancy a hug. "Thanks for being so understanding. What will you do all morning?" "I think I might watch the end of the Trish Tottenham movie," Nancy said. "Good idea. I'll set it up." Bess went over to the TV and turned it on. "Tell me when you want me to stop." Nancy moved over to the bed, carrying her juice. She watched the high-speed action on the screen until she saw a scene she didn't remember. "Stop," she said. "Call me at the restaurant if you need anything," Bess said, and then she left. Settling back on her bed, Nancy turned her attention to what was happening on screen. In the movie, Joanna Burton, in her Trish Tottenham role, was searching for a stolen diamond. Nancy wasn't exactly clear as to who had taken the gem, but Trish seemed to know exactly whom she was after. Trish carefully searched a house as music played to a crescendo in the background. When she found the diamond, Nancy was struck by the simplicity of the hiding place. "I don't believe it!" she exclaimed, staring at the screen. "I know where Joanna Burton hid her diamonds! I've got to get out to her house now!" Nancy stood up. Ignoring the slight twinge of pain in her ankle, she grimaced as she slipped her swollen left foot into her sneaker, but she finally managed to get it on, leaving the laces very loosely tied. Nancy scribbled a quick note to Bess and George telling them where she was going. Then she grabbed her purse and rummaged for the keys to the rental car. She limped out to the car. As she unlocked the door, Nancy heard furtive footsteps approaching her from behind. Fear shot through her. Nancy whirled around and found herself face to face with Cy Baxter's assistant. "Rachel!" Nancy exclaimed, fighting down her fear. "What are you doing here?" On second glance, Nancy saw that Rachel was as frightened as she'd been. She was still wearing the navy dress she'd had on the day before. Her dark hair was a mess, and she wore no makeup. "You've got to help me," Rachel pleaded, grabbing Nancy's arm. "My life is in grave danger." Chapter 14. "What are you talking about?" Nancy asked. "How did you find me here?" Rachel kept her hand on Nancy's arm. "I got the address from the guest register at Baxter's Fine Jewelry," she said. "Please, you have to help me." "Shouldn't you talk to the police if your life is in danger?" "You don't understand. I can't go to the police. Besides, if it weren't for you, I wouldn't even know I was in any danger," Rachel said. Her eyes flitted around nervously, as if she were afraid someone would pop out of the parking lot to attack her. Nancy stared at the jeweler's assistant, totally puzzled. "If it weren't for me," she echoed. "Why don't you start at the beginning and tell me why you think you're in danger?" Nancy suggested. Rachel took a deep breath before beginning. "I'm the one who replaced the diamonds in Joanna Burton's necklace with cubic zirconia," she confessed. "You?" Nancy said, startled. Rachel nodded. "I knew it was wrong from the first, but I had to do it." Her eyes started tearing up, and she wiped at them with the back of one hand before continuing. "I used to work for Grand Central Studios in Hollywood in the wardrobe department. It was so exciting, and I got to meet all the stars. One of my favorites was Michael Davis. I idolized him. I worked on a movie he was starring in, and one day, when I was getting the costumes from his dressing room, I found a fake sapphire ring that Mr. Davis had worn in the movie. They'd finished shooting that day, so I thought no one would miss it. I picked it up and stuck it in my pocket." Nancy didn't see what any of this had to do with Joanna Burton's death or the stolen diamonds, but she listened patiently. "When was that?" she asked. "About 3 years ago, just as he was making his comeback," Rachel replied. "Anyway, it turned out that the ring wasn't an imitation. The sapphire was real and worth a lot of money, and the ring belonged to Michael." Rachel's eyes widened. "Was there ever an uproar on the set when he found out it was missing?" Rachel pushed her hair out of her face, then took a deep breath. "I was afraid to admit I'd taken the ring, so I decided to sneak it back into his dressing room. Wouldn't you know, his agent walked in and caught me with it." "His agent?" Nancy echoed. "Stephanie Cook," Rachel said, nodding. "She saw me with the ring. I tried to explain, and she was very nice about it. I put the ring back, but the next day I was fired. No one mentioned the ring, but I knew that Stephanie had something to do with it. That was when I moved here." Nancy felt sorry for Rachel, but she still wasn't sure what the point of the story was. "What does all that have to do with Joanna Burton, or the necklace, or me?" Nancy asked. "I'm getting to that part," Rachel said, holding up a hand. "I moved to Carmel and got a job with Mr. Baxter. He's been teaching me how to work on jewelry. One day Stephanie came into the shop with Miss Burton. I hoped that she wouldn't recognize me, But she did. A few weeks later, she called me. Tears began to run down Rachel's cheeks. Nancy opened her purse and handed Rachel a tissue. She said she had a job for me, Rachel continued, wiping her eyes. Miss Burton had a diamond necklace she wanted to wear, but it was so valuable she didn't want to wear it in public. She hadn't yet had time to get an imitation of it made, so she wanted to know if I would take out the real stones and reset the necklace with fakes. Nancy was beginning to see where this story was going. "And?" she prompted. "I didn't want to do it, but when I hesitated, Stephanie reminded me that Mr. Baxter probably didn't know about my tendency to take things that didn't belong to me." So, Stephanie had been in on the insurance scam with Joanna, Nancy now knew. Still, Stephanie must not know where the real diamonds were hidden. If she did, she would never have asked Nancy about her theories of where the gems might be. "Stephanie brought me the paste, the fake stones that had been in Joanna Burton's old necklace," Rachel continued. "She told me to take the real diamonds out of the new necklace and replace them with the fakes." "Is that the way it's usually done?" Nancy asked. Rachel shook her head. "Usually the paste and the original are two separate pieces. I'd never heard of taking apart an original and making it a fake," Rachel said. "But I didn't feel that I had much choice in the matter. I like it here in Carmel. I'm trying to stick it out with Mr. Baxter until I learn enough." "So you replaced the diamonds with the fake stones," Nancy said. That explained why there were scratches on the necklace. Rachel wasn't very experienced as a jeweler. "Didn't you wonder why you were asked to do it?" "Of course," Rachel replied. "But with Stephanie threatening me, I figured it would be better not to ask. I did all the work when Mr. Baxter wasn't there. He wouldn't have liked me doing work without its going through him first." She shook her head and added, "I must have been out of the store when Miss Burton brought the necklace in to have Mr. Baxter appraise it. I didn't know he had found the fakes until you and your friends came in, pretending to be customers." "Why didn't you go to the police then?" Nancy wanted to know. Rachel glanced nervously over her shoulder. "Stephanie called me from L.A. on Thursday night. I was still in shock about the whole thing then, and hadn't decided what to do. She told me that you were investigating the gem switch. She said that if I told anyone about my part in it, she'd make it look as if I was behind the whole scam." Suddenly, another piece of the puzzle fell into place for Nancy. "So that's when you sent me that smashed cuckoo clock, to try to scare me off the case." A blush came to Rachel's cheeks as she nodded. "After I heard about Miss Burton's death, I was scared. That clock had just come in for a customer, but I sent it to you instead. Cy will kill me when he finds out. And when I saw that picture of Michael Davis yesterday, I really panicked. It's not mine. I know Stephanie left it for me as a threat. That's when I decided to talk to you and tell you the truth. I guess I was hoping you could help me decide what to do. I called you first at the inn. The woman there said to try the Café de Carmel. When I got down by the beach, I saw a big rock tumbling down toward you. I knew it wasn't an accident because I saw someone running away." "You saw the person?" Nancy asked, grabbing Rachel's arm. "Who was it?" "I wasn't close enough to tell, but I think it was a man. Anyway, I got out of there as fast as I could. I've been driving around in my car all night, too afraid to even go home. What if someone's waiting for me there?" Rachel said in a voice edged with panic. "A man," thought Nancy. "Morgan Fowler?" He seemed to be around when anything was happening in the case. Nancy recalled his sudden appearance outside Marcia's store and the way he had popped up in the video store. Now that she thought about it, there was something else suspicious about him. He'd asked about her fall from the rocks. How could he have known about that unless he was there? Nancy hadn't had the impression that Bess or George had told him. She'd have to check with her friends. Nancy tore herself from her thoughts. giving the jeweler's assistant an encouraging smile, Nancy said, "Rachel, it's important that you go to the police with this information. From what you've told me, I don't think you've done anything really wrong, and the police will definitely go easier on you if you cooperate with them. Your information will probably help them catch Joanna Burton's killer." Rachel hesitated only a moment before saying, "I guess I should. Will you go with me?" Nancy was torn. She hated to leave Rachel alone, but she simply couldn't wait any longer to search Joanna Burton's house. "There's something I must do now. Why don't we meet back here?" Nancy looked at her watch. "At noon." Rachel reluctantly agreed. Finally, Nancy was able to get into her car and leave. As she drove, something Rachel had told her came back to Nancy. Rachel had said that Stephanie called her on Thursday night from Los Angeles. The drive to Carmel from LA had to be 5 or 6 hours long. Stephanie must have gotten up awfully early on Friday to arrive at 10 a.m., unless she had lied about when she arrived in Carmel. Nancy recalled the 2 coffee cups on Joanna Burton's terrace. Could Stephanie Cook have been the actress's visitor? Also, how did Stephanie know Nancy was investigating? Joanna Burton didn't know. Someone else must have told her. Another accomplice? A third person involved? Nancy hoped to find some clues at Joanna Burton's. She drove to the overlook near the actress's house without any idea of how she was going to get inside the fence. Climbing over it with her sprained ankle would be impossible. When Nancy got to the black iron gates, she was amazed to see that one of them was slightly ajar. Had the police been so careless as to forget to check it? Nancy slipped through the narrow opening. As she walked down the drive, she spotted the yellow police tape across the front door. "What's this?" she murmured to herself. The garage doors were open. Nancy's hair stood on end. Were the police there again? She didn't see any patrol cars. Peeking inside the garage, Nancy did a double take. Stephanie Cook's silver sports car was parked inside. Of course, the agent was probably there searching for the diamonds. Nancy darted forward and pressed her face against the car window. Immediately, she spied a gold charm bracelet lying in the change bin between the 2 front seats. The bracelet was spread out, and it was easy to see there was a gap between 2 charms. Nancy quickly took in the other charms, a lone cypress, a spouting whale, and several others. But there was no sea otter. Nancy let out a low whistle. So Stephanie had pushed Joanna Burton down the balcony stairs. Nancy's mind raced, trying to fit together all the pieces of the case. Chances were that Stephanie was the person who'd been drinking coffee with Joanna Burton. That meant the agent had come up from LA earlier than she claimed. Still, Nancy couldn't understand why Stephanie would kill Joanna when they were on the brink of closing a big deal. There was one person who could answer Nancy's questions, but Nancy had the feeling Stephanie wouldn't be cooperative. "I can't leave without testing my theory about where the diamonds are," Nancy whispered out loud. The police seal on the door leading from the garage to the house was already broken, Nancy saw. Stephanie was probably still inside. If Nancy could sneak in undetected, she could call the police from inside and look for the diamonds. Nancy held her breath, trying the doorknob. It turned easily. Slipping inside, she paused to listen. The only noise she heard was that of her own pounding heart. She tiptoed down a long hall to the kitchen, which was just off the living room. Nancy immediately spied a telephone hanging on the wall near the sink. She started toward it, then went to the refrigerator instead. She closed her eyes for a moment, picturing Trish Tottenham's search for the diamond in Diamond Deceit. Nancy opened the freezer door and took out the single tray of ice, just as she'd watched Trish Tottenham do. Carrying the tray to the sink, she turned on a thin stream of hot water and held the tray beneath it. She watched as the cubes slowly melted. "Wow!" Nancy exclaimed softly. Her eyes opened wide as she stared down at a tray studded with a dozen sparkling diamonds. Chapter 15. Nancy's heart was pounding as she carefully scooped the diamonds out of the tray. She could hardly believe it. She had found the gems. Joanna Burton had hidden them in the exact same place as the detective she had portrayed in the movie. Keeping the diamonds carefully grasped in her hand, Nancy hurried to the kitchen phone. As soon as she lifted the receiver, she heard Stephanie's voice on the line. "I tried everywhere, but—" The agent broke off suddenly. "Someone's in the house. They picked up an extension," Nancy heard Stephanie say. "You know what to do," a man's voice responded. It was Morgan Fowler. So there was another accomplice. Adrenaline shot through Nancy as she realized she'd been found out. She slammed the phone down and searched frantically for the nearest way out. She headed for the terrace doors she and George had used the day before and frantically pulled on the doorknobs. They were locked. She was just opening the lock when Stephanie's icy voice spoke up from behind her. "Miss Drew, how nice of you to drop by." Nancy turned around slowly, holding the diamonds behind her. As inconspicuously as possible, she eased the stones into the back pocket of her jeans. She didn't like the way Stephanie was looking at her, as if she were a trapped mouse. "Have you finished your little investigation yet?" the agent asked pleasantly. Nancy knew what Stephanie was getting at. She wanted to know if Nancy had found the diamonds. "I was hoping that maybe I'd run across the diamonds," Nancy replied, just as pleasantly. "Don't waste your time. I've scoured this place from top to bottom. They aren't here." Stephanie eyed Nancy slyly. "Where were you thinking of looking?" Nancy shrugged. "No place in particular." "Come on, Nancy. You're a better detective than that." "I'm good enough to have figured out your little scheme," Nancy said, stalling. With Bess at the restaurant and George playing golf, it could be hours before they got the note saying where Nancy had gone. "Is that right? Do tell," the agent said sarcastically. "The reason the diamonds were replaced with fakes was to get insurance money to finance the movie that would give Joanna Burton her big comeback break," Nancy began. "Very good," Stephanie said, impressed. "The only way Joanna could get a part was to buy her way in. Since she didn't have any money, I convinced her that we could sell her jewelry. The sentimental old fool didn't want to get rid of the diamonds her dear departed husband had given her. I had to figure out a way we could get the money and still keep the diamonds. Not a bad plan, eh?" Stephanie said proudly. "What I can't understand is why you murdered her," Nancy said. For a brief moment, Stephanie's eyes showed a flicker of sadness. "That wasn't part of the plan," she said quickly. "Joanna was going to back out of the scam when she heard that Marcia might be arrested for theft. She said she didn't realize that someone else might be hurt, even though it was the middle of the night. I got in my car and drove up from LA. I didn't get here until after 2 in the morning. I tried all night to talk some sense into her. I told her I'd take care of it, but she fired me." "So you pushed her," Nancy guessed, keeping her voice calm. "I didn't mean to," Stephanie said, "but I was tired and angry. As Joanna was walking away from me, I took her by the shoulders and tried to shake some sense into her." Stephanie pointed out the French doors. "She was standing there at the top of the steps." The agent's voice took on a faraway tone. Nancy could tell that she was reliving the awful moment. "When I let go, Joanna swayed for a moment. I reached out to try to catch her," Stephanie went on, her voice rising. "I caught hold of her beach wrap, but the seam tore. She grabbed at my arm but missed and tumbled down the steps." "Then what happened?" Nancy asked gently. Stephanie's eyes flitted wildly around the room. I panicked. I ran out to my car and drove away. Then I remembered that the diamonds were still in the house. I wanted those stones. I turned around and drove back, but you were already here." Nancy felt fear rise as Stephanie glared at her. While the agent was talking, Nancy stood with her back to the terrace doors. With her hand behind her back, she was trying to find the catch to unlock the doors. She knew she had to keep Stephanie's attention focused elsewhere until she had the lock open. "What about your new client, Morgan Fowler? What does he have to do with this?" Nancy asked. "Morgan. I'll use part of the money from the sale of the diamonds to help his movie career. He's shown me just how loyal and helpful he can be," Stephanie said. Suddenly, the last pieces of the puzzle fell into place. "He must have left that picture for Rachel. He could have sneaked in there, and he must have pushed that rock at me on the beach yesterday." "Right again," Stephanie said, smiling. She didn't seem at all nervous that Nancy had pieced it all together. "He's wanted to make it as an actor for so long. He knows I can help him, so he's willing to do almost anything for me." "You certainly had me fooled. You practically ignored him when you arrived here yesterday," Nancy said, still trying to turn the lock. "I couldn't have people thinking that I had time for an unknown like him," Stephanie said. "He must have given you the security code to Miss Burton's gate so you could get in today," Nancy said. Stephanie nodded. She tapped her lips with one finger, studying Nancy. "What am I going to do with you?" Nancy took a quick breath. She didn't know how much longer she could distract Stephanie. "Rachel is at the police station right now, telling them everything she knows," Nancy lied. She had to try anything. "That's a laugh," Stephanie said. "The police will end up putting her in jail once Morgan and I are through with her." Nancy shot the agent a nervous glance. "Why? What have you done?" "It's what we're going to do that's important," Stephanie said. "Rachel will be the one who gets blamed for the diamond theft, Joanna's murder, everything. You see, the police will find out that she has a history of stealing jewels that don't belong to her. They'll find the old setting for Joanna's diamonds hidden in Rachel's apartment. Morgan will find a good spot for it. I'm sure the police will assume she killed Joanna, too." "I'm sure," Nancy said sarcastically. "But enough about Rachel," Stephanie said, her expression hardening. As the agent started toward her, Nancy knew her time was up. She twisted the lock one last time, and it turned. Stephanie slipped in a small puddle of water left by the dripping diamonds. Nancy didn't waste a second. Yanking open the terrace doors, she tore outside. She tried to run, but was slowed by the pain in her ankle. The stairs leading to the beach were right in front of her, and Nancy started down them. She gasped when she felt hands shove against her back. She swayed slightly, then plunged forward. "No!" Nancy screamed. The last thing she felt was a blinding pain as her head struck the stairs. Then everything went black. Chapter 16. Nancy couldn't figure out why she had her clothes on in the bathtub, or why she'd let the water get so cold. She didn't want to open her eyes to find out, because her head was throbbing. At last, she managed to open one eye, but all she saw was swirling gray. Perhaps her dream wasn't over yet. Nancy opened both eyes, then slowly sat up. If she was dreaming, her head and ankle wouldn't hurt so much. Beneath her, Nancy felt the rough surface of a large rock. Water lapped gently against her body, and fog wrapped her in a gray blanket. She couldn't see more than 2 feet in front of her. Nancy tried to think where she was. How had she ended up here? Then it all came back to her, the scene with Stephanie and getting pushed down the steps. She gingerly felt her forehead, flinching as she touched the bump there. Just then a wave swept over Nancy, drenching her. She felt its powerful pull, The tide was coming in. Nancy's heart leaped into her throat as she realized that Stephanie must have dragged her onto a rock offshore and left her to drown. The water was already up to her chin. Soon it would cover her completely. "The diamonds!" Nancy gasped aloud. Her hand moved automatically to her back pocket. It was empty. Stephanie had gotten them. Nancy let out a frustrated groan. How was she going to get out of there? She dangled her foot, then her leg, off the rock, but couldn't find solid ground. The water was too deep. She searched for the shoreline, but all she saw was a constant and steady gray mist. "Help!" Nancy shouted with all the strength she could muster. There was no response. She yelled again, even though it made her head hurt more. How long have I been unconscious? She wondered. Despite her throbbing ankle, Nancy stood up. The water was too high to sit any more. Waves continued to wash over the rock, each one higher than the last. How am I going to get out of this one? She wondered out loud. She could swim, but if she chose the wrong direction, she'd be a goner. "Hey, wait a minute," Nancy murmured, as another wave crashed over her. Waves moved toward the beach, didn't they? All she had to do was swim with the flow of water. Nancy lowered herself into the water and waited for the next wave. As it came toward her, she kicked along with it. The pain in her ankle and her head made her feel faint, but she forced herself to keep moving. "Come on, Drew," she urged. She didn't know how long she swam, but just when she thought she couldn't last another second, her feet touched the sandy bottom. Nancy crawled out of the water and collapsed on the beach, shivering. Too exhausted to move, she drew in huge, gulping breaths of air. When she finally caught her breath, she slowly got to her feet. She had to call the police. Nancy cocked her head to one side, listening. Was that someone calling her name? She listened again, then grinned. "Over here! Bess! George! I'm over here!" she called back. Out of the fog, her two friends appeared, both of them worried. "How did you find me?" Nancy asked, as the two girls hugged her, then wrapped her in a blanket George was carrying. "It wasn't easy," George said. "I read your note when I got back from my golf game around lunchtime. It seemed to be taking you a long time to get back, so I called Bess, and we came out here pronto." Bess picked up the story. "When we got here, police were everywhere. Seaside Security called them because they found the front gate open when they were making their rounds, but there was no sign of you." "Stephanie opened the gate," Nancy said, wrapping the blanket more tightly around her. "Stephanie?" George looked surprised. "She said it was open when she arrived, and that you hadn't ever been here." "We knew you had because we saw the car parked at the overlook. She insisted it wouldn't do any good to look for you here. Boy, am I glad we didn't listen to her." "Where is Stephanie now?" Nancy asked. "She hasn't gotten away yet, has she?" "Gotten away? What are you talking about?" George asked, perplexed. A horrified shiver ran through Nancy. "You mean the police didn't find out?" Nancy started to move down the beach, propelled by a new sense of urgency. "I don't have time to go into it now, but Stephanie has the diamonds, and she killed Joanna. We have to stop her." "But Stephanie said that Cy Baxter's assistant, Rachel, made the switch," Bess said. She caught up with Nancy, supporting her with one arm. Nancy shook her head. "Stephanie and Morgan are framing Rachel." "Uh-oh," George said, frowning. "Morgan is with Stephanie at Joanna Burton's house right now. Stephanie said that she wanted to get some of her belongings at the house. But, Nancy, the house is back the other way." Nancy frowned down at her swollen ankle. "George, you can run faster than I can. Go on ahead and make sure Stephanie doesn't get away." "You got it!" George sprinted and was soon swallowed up by the fog. Nancy and Bess followed behind as quickly as they could. When they reached the steps leading to Joanna Burton's terrace, Nancy ran up them. Bad ankle or no, she couldn't lose a second. She raced across the terrace, threw open the doors and hurried inside the house. She heard Bess behind her. "You let go of me this instant!" Stephanie was yelling at the front door. Hurrying over, Nancy saw that George had the agent in an arm lock. The agent was clutching a small bag in one hand. "You have no right," Stephanie continued, ranting. "I'm calling my lawyer." The agent broke off when her gaze fell on Nancy. Stephanie's face went completely white. Nancy was relieved to see Detective Bomarito come down the stairs from the second floor, accompanied by Morgan Fowler. "What's going on here?" the detective asked, staring at Nancy's sopping wet clothes. "What happened to you?" "I'll be glad to tell you everything," Nancy said. "But first, I think you should search these two." She nodded toward Stephanie and Morgan. "One of them has Joanna Burton's diamonds." Nancy lay back in her bed at the Province Inn, her ankle propped up on pillows and wrapped in an ice pack. "Come on in," she said, motioning to the 3 people standing in the doorway. "Are you sure you feel up to it?" Marcia asked. Len and Ted crowded in behind her. "I do if you've brought food. I'm starving," Nancy said, grinning. Bess held the door open. Ted set a platter of fruit on the table beside Nancy's bed. Nancy immediately took an apple slice. After moving over beside Nancy's bed, Marcia stood and twisted her bracelet. "How can we ever thank you?" she asked. "You don't have to," Nancy told her. She watched out of the corner of her eye as Ted pulled Bess aside and spoke quietly to her. Bess said something to him, then they slipped out the door. Finally, Len cleared his throat and said, "Business is great now that people know we didn't steal Joanna Burton's diamonds. I can't believe how many calls Marcia and I both have had since our names appeared in the newspaper." "I'm really glad for you," George said. Marcia held out a charm for George and Nancy to see. "Look, Len gave me this. It's the logo for his landscaping business. Isn't it darling?" "It's beautiful," Nancy said, acting as if she'd never seen the charm before. She picked up a jeweler's box from the bedside table and opened it, showing Marcia and Len a charm bracelet with a sea otter hanging from it. "Bess and George and I got bracelets too." George held out her arm, decorated with the same bracelet. "They're from Rachel. She was so grateful that we cleared her name and found the real culprits that she sent these over as gifts." Marcia smiled, then looked at Len. "We're not going to stay. We just wanted to know if you'd come back in October for our wedding." "I'd love to come," Nancy said, right away. She was really happy that things had worked out for Marcia and Len. Marcia gave Nancy a hug. Then she and Len left. "Romance is definitely in the air," Nancy said after the door closed. "Speaking of which, I wonder where Bess and Ted went." "Who knows? A romantic walk on the beach," George said. "I guess we'll have to get used to the idea that Bess is moving here." Nancy forced a smile. "If she's happy, then we should be happy for her," she said. George handed Nancy another slice of apple and picked up a banana for herself. She sat down on the bed beside Nancy, and they munched in silence. A few minutes later, the door opened, and Bess walked in. "Anything left for me?" she asked. "A little," George told her. "What happened to Ted? Where did you 2 lovebirds go?" Bess's blue eyes sparkled with unshed tears as she sat in the chair next to Nancy's bed. "Ted and I were saying goodbye," she said. "I'm not staying in Carmel." Nancy wasn't entirely surprised. "What made you change your mind?" she asked, reaching out and squeezing Bess's hand. "Ted hadn't wanted me to go look for you yesterday," Bess said. "What if we hadn't? What would have happened to you? Anyway, that got me thinking about some of the things you guys have said. I realized that every time we wanted to do something, Ted tried to stop me." George said, "I don't want you to leave Carmel just because of what Nancy and I said. I'm sure Ted has his good side. But you have to admit that he hasn't shown it much since you and Nancy got here," Bess said, frowning. I've been thinking about it a lot. There's no way I can give up all I have in River Heights for someone who's so jealous and possessive. What kind of life would that be? We're sorry things didn't work out for you here, Nancy said. But I'm glad you're coming back home with us, George added. Bess leaned back in her chair with a sigh. I think I got carried away by all the compliments on my desserts, Bess admitted. I can still bake in River Heights, and maybe I'll even get 1 or 2 good words on my desserts there. Nancy couldn't help grinning. Bess, you never have to ask for compliments. You are the greatest, she said. She and George swooped down on Bess to wrap her in a giant hug. End of Diamond Deceit. So you pushed her, Nancy guessed, keeping her voice calm. That's not calm. But if she chose the wrong direction, she'd be a goner. No! No,